You weren't invited, James whispered, straightening his expensive suit. We stood in the high-security reception hall of the Global Defense Treaty Conference Center. He was trying to use his VIP status to evict me. I didn't flinch. I just handed my ID card to the hostess. The scanner flashed red. The hostess paled, turning to the admiral nearby. Sir, she's here. The power dynamic shifted in a single heartbeat. Have you ever been the one overlooked while everyone else got the spotlight? Let me know your story down in the comments. I am reading every single one. Growing up in the Vance compound wasn't a childhood. It was a corporate ledger, and I was the bad investment. My father, James, never raised his voice or a hand to me. He used a much more efficient weapon: silence. Ignoring me was his preferred method of emotional accounting. My mother, Rebecca, had passed away when I was young, taking the last ounce of genuine warmth with her. After that, everything became a transaction. When it came to my brother Joshua, every expense was calculated as a high-yield asset. My father spent $180,000 on a prestigious academy for Joshua. That was a necessary investment. My career aspirations, however, were casually written off as pointless hobbies. This is the trap of cruel normalization. When you are systematically undervalued in your own home, the neglect becomes the baseline. You stop recognizing the cruelty because it is woven into the daily fabric of your existence. You start believing that their transactional affection is the standard market rate. Joshua strutted around the compound, a golden child fueled by unearned equity. His entitlement was subsidized by my father's endless credit lines, while I was left to audit my own deficits. I remember the afternoon I brought home my top-tier flight certificate. I had spent months preparing, desperate for acknowledgement. I walked into his mahogany-paneled office, feeling a rare, foolish spark of hope that this metric of success would finally earn a place on his ledger. James didn't even look up from his spreadsheet. He waved his hand dismissively, telling me to sit down and be quiet so we could discuss purchasing a new race car for Joshua. I sat. I didn't scream. I didn't tear the certificate. This is the invisible chain of the survivor. In a toxic ecosystem, compliance isn't weakness. It is calculated self-preservation. I knew that fighting for his approval was a bankrupt enterprise, but I also knew I needed a roof over my head until I had the capital to launch my own life. So I swallowed the indignity. I learned to mask my ambition behind a blank expression. I audited my own emotions, filing away the anger and hurt into a locked vault. I became the silent partner in their version of a family, footing the bill with my own self-worth while Joshua reaped all the dividends. They weren't shocked by their blatant favoritism. They just assumed I would always play along, forever seeking a return on an investment that was mathematically designed to fail. But I wasn't submitting. I was simply buying time. I was gathering the data, assessing the liabilities, mapping the exits, and preparing to close the account entirely. I realized that love in the Vance household was a subscription service, and I was no longer willing to pay the premium. I enlisted in the military the moment I was legally able. It wasn't a cry for help or a dramatic plea for attention. It was a strategic asset relocation. I cut off all expectations of my father's love. Love was an unreliable currency, and the military offered a structured, undeniable path to equity. I entered the Air Force and began accumulating skills with the cold, clinical precision of a lead auditor. I learned tactical rescue, survival operations, and advanced aerial maneuvers. I thrived in the freezing isolation of total independence. When I originally applied for advanced flight certification, I needed financial backing. I sent a formal, perfectly formatted request to James, outlining the career benefits and the exact return on investment. His response was a prompt, undeniable rejection. He told me he couldn't liquidate funds for a risky venture, not when Joshua needed capital for another failed business startup. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just opened my laptop and started clicking apply on every military scholarship and extra duty roster available. I paid for my certification in blood, sweat, and grueling overtime. I logged thousands of flight hours in the harshest conditions, while my family logged luxury vacations in tropical resorts. Over the years, the dynamics slowly shifted. As Joshua's ventures consistently went bankrupt, my father's pristine financial empire began to crack. The silent treatment he had weaponized against me morphed into desperate, demanding text messages. He needed loans. He needed corporate bailouts. He needed me to liquidate my hard-earned military savings to cover Joshua's reckless deficits. I never replied. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. My silence to their endless financial demands wasn't an act of submission or fear. It was a manifestation of my maturity. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret for ignoring my own flesh and blood, but there was only clarity. This wasn't an emotional breakdown. It was a balance sheet. I had spent 34 years assessing the cost of their conditional affection, and I had officially closed the ledger. I rose through the ranks, eventually becoming an Air Force tactical rescue commander. My value was no longer determined by James Vance's approval. It was measured in lives saved, critical missions completed, and hostile coordinates secured. Every tactical extraction I led reinforced the boundary I had drawn between my past and my present. They had denied me the capital to fly, so I built my own wings from scratch. I had become the undisputed architects of my own authority, operating entirely outside their jurisdiction, untouchable and utterly self-made. Which brings us back to the Global Defense Treaty Gala. James stood beside me in the reception hall, his jaw clenched in fury as the security scanner flashed red. He had spent the last 10 minutes attempting to have security escort me out, smugly convinced that I had forged my credentials. He hadn't bothered to track my career for years, viewing my military service as a dark period he preferred to ignore. He thought he held the absolute monopoly on power. But when the hostess turned and whispered urgently to the Admiral, the entire market corrected itself. The Admiral, a man whose time was measured in billions of defense dollars and global strategic influence, pivoted sharply. He bypassed James entirely. He didn't even glance at my father's custom-tailored suit or his posturing stance. The Admiral walked straight to me, stopped with military precision, and delivered a crisp, unmistakable salute. "Commander Vance," the Admiral said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quieted hall. "It is an absolute honor. The Strategic Committee is waiting for your debriefing on the Pacific extraction data. We salute your command, and we are grateful for your service." I returned the salute with perfect, unblinking form. "Thank you, sir. I am ready to brief the committee." James stood frozen, his arrogant posture dissolving into profound, staggering confusion. He stepped forward, desperately attempting to reclaim his perceived authority. "Excuse me, Admiral," James interrupted, his voice lacking its usual boom. "I am James Vance. I hold a VIP pass to this event. There must be some critical mistake regarding my daughter's presence here." The hostess turned to James, her expression a masterclass in professional courtesy mixed with cold, undeniable reality. "Sir, there is absolutely no mistake," she explained, holding up his VIP badge for him to see. "Your ticket is a +1 guest pass, which I authorized during the security clearance phase, hoping you had finally changed. I clearly overestimated your character." The color drained from my father's face. He looked at the laminated badge, then back at me. The realization hit him with the devastating force of a total market crash. The prestige he had been flaunting all evening, the VIP status he had aggressively tried to use to humiliate me, was not earned by his corporate empire. It was a direct byproduct of the very career he had dismissed as a pointless hobby. He wasn't the primary investor in this room. He was a dependent parasite, surviving entirely on the residual glory of the daughter he had written off. They weren't shocked by what they had done to me over the years. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along, and that the rest of the world was now operating strictly on my terms. After the high-level briefing concluded, I stepped out into the manicured conference gardens to clear my head. The night air was sharp, efficient, and perfectly still. I found James waiting near the exit lounge, looking diminished and out of place among the crowd of high-ranking diplomats. The arrogant swagger was entirely gone. His shoulders were slumped, his head bowed, and the expensive designer suit suddenly looked like it belonged to a much larger, more important man. He had waited 3 grueling hours in the cold just to speak with me. I approached him with the steady, measured pace of a commander assessing a neutralized threat. When he finally looked up, his voice didn't boom with patriarchal authority. It trembled, fragile and broken. "Mackenzie," he began, his tone dripping with a pathetic manufactured humility that I immediately saw right through. "I didn't know what you had achieved out there." I didn't offer a reassuring smile. I didn't offer a bitter reprimand. I simply stood there and waited for the inevitable transaction he was about to propose. My company, James stammered, nervously rubbing his hands together. It's facing total insolvency. Joshua made some terrible, reckless investments. We are weeks away from catastrophic bankruptcy. I saw the immense respect the Admiral gave you tonight. I know you have access to substantial military grants, independent capital, government connections. I need a loan, Mackenzie. Just a temporary injection of funds to stabilize the assets. Joshua is currently hiding in Europe to avoid the creditors, leaving me entirely alone to face this catastrophe. He was actually begging. The powerful man who had refused to fund my flight certificate, who had told me to sit down and be quiet while he financed my brother's whims, was now asking me to liquidate my resources to save his failing empire. I didn't feel a surge of malicious joy or triumph. Revenge wasn't loud this time. It was strictly accounting. I reached into the breast pocket of my dress uniform and pulled out a folded, legally binding document. I didn't hand him a blank check. I handed him a court-approved no-contact order. I am not your silent investor, I stated, my voice as cold and clear as ice. I am not a line item you can casually draw from to cover Joshua's deficits. This document legally severs all remaining ties between us. You will not contact my command, you will not call my personal line, and you will absolutely not attempt to leverage my name for your corporate bailouts ever again. James stared at the paper in his trembling hands. You're abandoning your family? Over money? This isn't revenge, I corrected him, looking down at his defeated posture. This is a balance sheet. You are a toxic asset, and I am cutting my losses permanently. I don't want your empty apologies, and I don't want to watch your ruin. I just want my peace. He sat there on the bench, completely bankrupt in every sense of the word. He had spent his life imagining himself a kingmaker, but he was left with absolutely nothing, no capital, no legacy, and no daughter. I never returned to the Vance compound, nor did I ever look back. The very next morning, I logged into my accounts and initiated the transfer of my funds. I liquidated my personal investments and allocated my savings to a new cause. I didn't buy a luxury sports car or a sprawling estate to flaunt my new status. Instead, I established the Rebecca Vance Flight Endowment, named in honor of my late mother, the only moral compass who had ever offered me a true sense of direction before she passed away. The endowment was specifically engineered to fully fund advanced flight academy certifications for young women facing extreme financial hardship. It was designed for the girls who were told their ambitions were too expensive, the ones whose dreams were casually dismissed as pointless hobbies by the people supposed to protect them. A few weeks later, the scene shifted from sterile boardrooms to the sun-baked tarmac of the tactical training facility. I stood on the flight line, the deafening roar of jet engines filling the air, instructing a brand new class of female pilots. My face was calm, my posture completely relaxed. Watching them run their meticulous pre-flight checks, I realized the profound structural difference between destruction and creation. This is the justice of the planter. When you are deeply wronged, the immediate human instinct is to burn the opposing empire to the absolute ground. You want to see them suffer the way you suffered, but true justice doesn't come from destroying the people who starved you. It comes from taking the few seeds you managed to save, finding fertile ground, and planting a massive forest they will never, ever be allowed to enter. I didn't need to ruin my father's business or pursue his public humiliation. His own massive ego and Joshua's chronic incompetence were already doing that work for me. My ultimate retaliation was taking the resources he desperately tried to hoard and using them to build a thriving system of empowerment he could never understand or access. I didn't forgive him. The concept of forgiveness in this context was a deeply flawed metric. Letting go wasn't about absolving James of his massive emotional debts. It was about closing the ledger entirely and shredding the paperwork. I released the anger not because he or Joshua deserved my grace, but because I inherently deserved my freedom. By refusing to engage in their toxic cycle of financial and emotional abuse, I had reclaimed my total operational authority. Every single time one of my endowment pilots earned her wings and took to the sky, I was erasing a fraction of the heavy silence I had endured in that mahogany office. I had taken the bitter ashes of a bankrupt family dynamic and use them to forge a permanent legacy of absolute independence. For years, I believed that if I proved my worth, the silence would finally break. I was wrong. When a system is fundamentally corrupt, no sacrifice will ever balance the scales. True justice isn't about destroying those who failed you. It's about building a future where they no longer have a seat at your table. Subscribe to the channel, share this powerful message with someone who desperately needs to hear it today. And let's continue building our unbreakable community together.